She didn't shout. She didn't rage. She looked the council in the eyes and whispered, "You conquered Earth?" In that moment, they saw what humanity becomes when mercy dies. The silence before the storm, the war for Earth, lasted exactly 4 days. Commander Thalen of the Galactic Assembly stood in the command center of what humans had called the Pentagon and watched the final resistance crumble on his display screens. His secondary arms folded across his chest in satisfaction, while his primary hands gestured at the tactical maps. Around him, officers from a dozen different species worked in quiet efficiency, their victory so complete it felt almost anticlimactic. "The last military stronghold has surrendered," his tactical officer reported. The young Drexian scales shimmered with pride. "Total human casualties estimated at 1.8 billion. Our losses remain minimal." Thalen nodded slowly. 1.8 billion. The number should have felt significant, but in the context of galactic warfare it was merely acceptable. Earth had a population of nearly 9 billion before the invasion. The survivors would be integrated into assembly civilization, their resources cataloged, their technology absorbed, their culture gradually erased and replaced with something more appropriate for civilized society. It had all gone according to plan. Perhaps too perfectly according to plan. The thought nagged at Thalen as he reviewed the final battle reports. Earth's military had fought with determination, but their weapons were generations behind assembly technology. Their ships had been destroyed in the first hours. Their orbital defenses had fallen like dominoes. Their ground forces had mounted desperate last stands that achieved nothing except adding to the casualty count. And yet something felt wrong. "Bring me the human scientist," Thalen ordered, the one our intelligence identified as their foremost expert on xenobiology. 20 minutes later, guards escorted Dr. Marcus Webb into the command center. He was a tall man, perhaps 50 years old, with gray streaking through his dark hair and eyes that held an unsettling calmness for someone whose world had just been conquered. His hands were bound, but his posture remained straight, almost relaxed. "Dr. Webb," Thalen said in flawless English. The assembly made it a point to learn the languages of conquered species. It made the integration process smoother. "I am Commander Thalen. You will assist us in cataloging Earth's biological resources." Webb looked around the command center, his gaze passing over the alien officers and their equipment without apparent fear or anger. When his eyes returned to Thalen, there was something in them that made the commander's skin prickle beneath his uniform. "You think you've won?" Webb said quietly. Thalen's mandibles clicked in amusement. "I know we've won. Your planet is occupied. Your military is destroyed. Your governments have surrendered. These are facts, not opinions." "Yes," Webb agreed. "Those are facts." He paused and a faint smile touched his lips. "But you're missing context." "Explain." Webb shrugged as much as his bonds allowed. "How many humans have you processed through your detention centers?" Thalen frowned at the odd question. He gestured to his data officer, who quickly pulled up the numbers. "Approximately 5.2 billion have been registered and cataloged. And Earth's population before the invasion? 8.9 billion. The difference is accounted for by combat casualties and infrastructure collapse." Webb's smile grew slightly. "Are you certain about that?" The question hung in the air. Thalen felt his certainty waver for the first time since the invasion began. He turned to his data officer. "Verify the casualty estimates. Cross-reference with population centers that were targeted." As his staff worked, Thalen studied Webb more carefully. The human's calmness was not the resignation of defeat. It was something else. Something patient. "Commander," the data officer said after several minutes, his voice uncertain, "the numbers don't reconcile. Even accounting for maximum casualty estimates from all bombardments and infrastructure failures, we should have processed at least 7 billion humans by now. We're missing approximately 2 billion registered individuals." The command center went quiet. Thalen's 4 eyes narrowed as he stepped closer to Webb. "Where are they?" "Gone," Webb said simply. "Evacuated, hidden, scattered across this solar system and beyond in places your scouts would never think to look. We had months of warning before you arrived, Commander. Did you think we spent that time building more ships for you to destroy? That would have been foolish." Thalen felt cold realization creeping up his spine. "You sacrificed your world deliberately." "We sacrificed our birthplace to save our species," Webb corrected. "There's a difference. Earth is where we came from. It's not all we are." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. You wanted to teach us our place in your galactic order. Instead, you've given us the greatest motivation a species can have. And what is that? Survival. Revenge. The absolute certainty that mercy is a luxury we can no longer afford. Thalen struck Webb across the face, sending him sprawling to the floor. The human's lip split and blood ran down his chin, but he laughed. Actually laughed. That's the other thing you don't understand, Webb said, pushing himself upright despite his bound hands. Pain is temporary. Hatred lasts forever. Every human you've killed, every city you've destroyed, every child left orphaned. We're remembering all of it. We're carving it into our collective memory so deep it will define us for generations. Take him to detention, Thalen ordered, his voice harder than he intended. Maximum security. As guards hauled Webb away, the human called back over his shoulder. You should count your ships, Commander. Count them carefully. I think you'll find some have gone missing. Thalen turned to his tactical officer. Report. Sir, 3 patrol cruisers failed to check in during the last cycle. We assumed it was communication interference from the planetary defense satellites we destroyed. Find them. Now. Over the next hour, the truth emerged in fragments that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. 3 patrol cruisers gone without distress signals. 2 observation posts on Earth's moon that had stopped transmitting. A supply convoy that had disappeared between Mars and Earth. And most troubling of all, the detention center logs showed discrepancies. Thousands of humans recorded as processed were now missing from their assigned facilities. How is this possible? Thalen demanded. We control every ship, every station, every access point in this system. His intelligence officer, a methodical Vryn, pulled up surveillance data. Commander, I think you should see this. The screen showed footage from a detention center in what had been called North America. Human prisoners moved through corridors in orderly lines following instructions, but the timestamp showed this was from 3 days ago. The current feed showed the same corridors completely empty. Check all detention centers. Every single one, the results came back within minutes. Across the occupied planet, detention centers were emptying, not through breakouts or violence. The humans were simply vanishing during routine transfers, during mealtimes, during sleep cycles, thousands at a time, disappearing into networks of tunnels and hidden spaces that shouldn't have existed in buildings the assembly had supposedly secured. They're mocking us, Thalen realized. They're showing us that we never had the control we thought we had. His communication officer's voice cut through the growing tension. Commander, we're receiving a transmission. It's broadcasting on all frequencies from somewhere outside the solar system. Show me. The screen filled with Webb's face. Not the bloodied captive from hours ago, but a recorded message. Behind him stood rows of humans in clean uniforms, their expressions hard and determined. And beyond them, through massive viewing ports, ships could be seen. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All bearing designs that matched nothing in the Assembly's databases. Commander Thalen, Webb's recorded voice said, by now you've noticed that your victory is incomplete. You're wondering where everyone went. You're starting to question whether you won at all. He paused. You didn't win. You triggered a countdown. Humanity spent centuries arguing with each other, dividing ourselves over trivial differences, wasting our potential on internal conflicts. Thank you for giving us a common enemy. Thank you for teaching us that mercy is weakness in your eyes. We've learned the lesson well. The image pulled back to show more of the facility behind Webb. Shipyards, construction bays, weapons testing ranges, an entire industrial infrastructure that must have taken years to build. You'll find Earth less hospitable in the coming months, Webb continued. Every day you remain, you'll lose ships, soldiers, supplies. Not in glorious battles, but in quiet disappearances. We'll bleed you slowly, wear you down, make you afraid to patrol your own occupied zones. And while you're trapped on our world trying to hold what you think you've won, we'll be out here, learning, building, preparing. Webb's expression hardened. You wanted to integrate us into your assembly. Congratulations. You've united humanity in a way we could never have managed ourselves. And when we come for you, and we will come, you'll discover what humans are like when mercy is no longer an option we're willing to consider. The transmission ended. Thalen stood in silence, staring at the blank screen. Around him, his officers waited for orders that he didn't know how to give. They had conquered Earth in 4 days. Now, standing in the heart of human civilization, Surrounded by their overwhelming military superiority, Thalen understood the terrible truth. They hadn't won a war. They had started one. And humanity had been preparing for this moment far longer than the Assembly had realized. Outside the Pentagon, the sun set on an occupied Earth. In the growing darkness, resistance cells activated across the planet. 2 billion humans hidden among the stars opened their eyes in secret facilities and remembered the faces of everyone they had lost. The Assembly had taught humanity that mercy was weakness. Now, they would learn what humanity became without it. When Mercy dies, 3 months had passed since the invasion, and Commander Thalen's confidence had eroded like sand in a relentless tide. The Assembly controlled Earth's major cities, its spaceports, its government centers. They had more ships, more soldiers, more firepower than humanity could ever hope to match. On paper, the occupation was proceeding smoothly. In reality, Thalen was losing a war he couldn't see or understand. The disappearances had become constant. A patrol squad would enter a building and never emerge. A supply transport would vanish between checkpoints separated by less than 50 kilometers. Observation posts would go silent in the middle of routine reports. No bodies were ever found. No wreckage, no evidence of what had happened. The soldiers and ships simply ceased to exist. Thalen stood in the command center and studied casualty reports that read like a nightmare written in bureaucratic language. 73 ships lost, over 4,000 personnel missing, 12 major supply depots destroyed, and still they had not seen a single human military force. No armies, no fleets, just shadows that struck and vanished. "Sir, we're receiving distress calls from Drexar Prime," his communications officer reported, her voice tight with stress. Thalen's blood went cold. Drexar Prime was not in Earth's solar system. It was 300 light-years away, the homeworld of one of the Assembly's founding species. "Show me." The transmission quality was poor, fragmented by interference or damage, but the image was clear enough. Drexar Prime's orbital defense platforms were burning. Ships with angular, aggressive designs unlike anything in the Assembly fleet darted between the massive stations, their weapons cutting through shields like they weren't there. The audio crackled with panicked voices shouting in Drexian. "They came from nowhere. Shields don't register them. Weapons are... oh, ancestors, the shipyards." The transmission cut out. Thalen stared at the blank screen, his 4 hands trembling. "Get me confirmation from Drexar Prime. Now." But before his communications officer could respond, another alert sounded. Then another. Within 5 minutes, Thalen's display was lighting up with emergency signals from across Assembly space. Vryn Station under attack. Casualties unknown. Korath colony losing atmosphere. Hull breaches in 17 sectors. Thalen mining operations went dark. No response to Hale's supply convoy to Nexus 7 destroyed. All hands lost. The attacks were simultaneous, coordinated across light years of space with impossible precision. Humanity had been planning this. While the Assembly celebrated their conquest of Earth, humans had been watching, learning, positioning their forces, and now they were striking everywhere at once. "How many ships do they have?" Thalen demanded. "Unknown, sir. They're using some kind of stealth technology our sensors can't penetrate. They appear, attack, and vanish before we can coordinate a response. Estimates range from 500 to several thousand vessels." Several thousand. Humanity had built several thousand warships while the Assembly thought they were a primitive species, barely capable of interstellar travel. Thalen's tactical officer pulled up a star map. Red icons marked human attacks across Assembly territory. The pattern was clear and terrifying. They weren't targeting military installations randomly. They were systematically destroying everything that made the Assembly function. Shipyards where vessels were built, mining colonies that provided raw materials, supply depots that kept the fleet operational, communication hubs that coordinated the vast bureaucracy of galactic governance. Humanity was dismantling the Assembly's infrastructure with surgical precision. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission. Same source as before." Webb's face filled the screen again, but this time he wasn't in a recording studio. He stood on the bridge of a warship, and behind him, Thalen could see Earth through the viewports. His Earth, the planet Thalen supposedly controlled. "Commander Thalen," Webb said, his voice calm but carrying an edge like a blade pressed against skin. "I told you we would come. I told you mercy was no longer an option. You didn't believe me. Your mistake," Thalen found his voice. "You're attacking civilian targets. Mining colonies, trade stations. Those facilities were not military threats. No, Webb agreed. They're economic targets. Infrastructure targets. The same kind of targets you hit when you invaded Earth. Power grids, communications, transportation. You taught us this strategy, remember? You showed us how to cripple a civilization without destroying it completely. We're just better students than you expected. The Assembly has fleets across the galaxy. You cannot win this war. Webb's expression didn't change. We're not trying to win, Commander. We're teaching you a lesson. Every species in the Assembly needs to understand something fundamental about humanity. He leaned closer to the camera. We remember. Every person you killed, we remember their names. Every city you burned, we remember its history. Every child you orphaned, we remember their faces. And we will never ever forget what you took from us. Thalen saw movement behind Webb. Human officers working at stations, their faces focused and professional. This wasn't a ragtag resistance. This was a military force that had been trained, equipped, and prepared for exactly this kind of warfare. You want us to withdraw from Earth? Thalen asked. Earth? Webb laughed, a sound without humor. Commander, you fundamentally misunderstand our objectives. We don't want you to leave Earth. Earth is already lost to us. 2 billion of our people died there. It's not our home anymore. It's a monument. A reminder of what happens when we show mercy to species who mistake kindness for weakness. Then what do you want? Webb's eyes hardened. We want the Assembly to disarm. Every species, every world, every military installation. You wanted to integrate us into your civilization. Congratulations. You're being integrated into ours, under our terms, by our rules. The audacity of the demand left Thalen speechless. Webb continued without waiting for a response. You have 72 hours to begin withdrawing your military forces from Assembly worlds. You will decommission your warships. You will surrender your weapons. You will establish monuments on every member world commemorating the humans who died when you invaded Earth. And you will accept human oversight of galactic affairs for the next century. That's insane. The Assembly will never agree to those terms. Then we'll continue the offensive until the Assembly no longer exists to refuse. Webb gestured off-screen, and the view shifted to show a tactical display. Dozens of Assembly worlds marked in red, indicating active combat operations. We've hit 17 major worlds in the past hour. We'll hit 30 more in the next hour. Then 60. Then 120. We've spent 3 months mapping every Assembly installation, every supply line, every weakness in your defensive networks. We know exactly where to strike and when. Thalen felt the weight of absolute defeat settling on his shoulders. Not military defeat. The Assembly still had more ships, more resources, more territory. But psychological defeat, strategic defeat. Humanity had outthought them, outplanned them, and now was demonstrating that superior technology meant nothing against superior strategy. Why? Thalen asked quietly. Why not just negotiate? Why not seek peaceful coexistence? Webb's expression softened slightly, and for a moment Thalen saw the scientist who had stood before him 3 months ago. The man who had believed in understanding between species. We tried that, Commander. We offered you partnership. We offered you our knowledge, our resources, our friendship. You responded with conquest and death. You showed us that in this galaxy, mercy is seen as weakness. Compassion is interpreted as vulnerability. Peace is mistaken for cowardice. Webb's voice grew harder. So we learned. We adapted. We became what we needed to be to survive. You wanted humanity to know its place. We do now. Our place is ensuring no species ever does to another civilization what you did to us. The transmission ended, leaving Thalen alone with his command staff and the crushing realization that they had created their own worst enemy. Over the next 72 hours, the Assembly's leadership tried to mount a coordinated response. They recalled fleets to defend homeworlds. They attempted to track human ships through their cloaking technology. They even tried to launch a retaliatory strike against the human facilities Webb had broadcast from. Every effort failed. The human fleet was everywhere and nowhere. Their ships moved through Assembly space like ghosts, striking and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. More importantly, the member species of the Assembly began to fracture. Species that had united to conquer Earth now turned on each other, blaming one another for the disaster. The Drexians demanded immediate peace negotiations. The Vryn wanted total war. The Korath pulled their forces back to protect their homeworld. The carefully constructed alliance that had ruled the galaxy for centuries crumbled under the weight of human pressure. On hour 71, the Assembly Council convened an emergency session. Thalen participated via hologram from occupied Earth, watching as representatives from 47 species argued, threatened, and ultimately capitulated to reality. They agreed to humanity's terms. All of them. The formal surrender took place on Earth, in the same Pentagon command center where Thalen had first questioned Webb. This time, Webb stood as the victor, flanked by human military officers and representatives from the hidden colonies that had sustained humanity through the occupation. Thalen signed the documents that dissolved the Assembly's military, established human oversight of galactic affairs, and committed every member species to remembering the 2 billion humans who had died. As he placed his signature on the final page, Thalen looked up at Webb. "You've won. But winning a war doesn't mean winning the peace. How will you enforce this across thousands of worlds?" Webb's answer was simple and chilling. The same way you would have. Through overwhelming force, constant vigilance, and the absolute certainty that any species that breaks these terms will face consequences they cannot survive. He paused. The difference is we'll do it efficiently. We won't waste lives unnecessarily. We won't torture or humiliate conquered peoples. We'll be firm, fair, and utterly unyielding. That's not mercy. No, Webb agreed. It's not. Mercy is what we offered you before the invasion. You rejected it. This is justice. This is consequence. This is the galaxy learning that humanity remembers everything and forgives nothing. When you take everything from, as Thalen left Earth that evening on one of the few assembly ships humanity allowed to remain operational. As his transport climbed through the atmosphere, he looked back at the planet below. Lights were returning to the cities. Humans were emerging from their hiding places. Life was beginning again on the world the Assembly had thought it controlled. They had conquered Earth in 4 days. Earth had conquered the galaxy in 3 months. The lesson was complete, written in fire and blood across 100 worlds. Humanity had learned what they were capable of when mercy was no longer an option. And the galaxy would spend the next century living under the rule of a species that had been pushed beyond forgiveness, beyond compassion, beyond anything except the cold determination to ensure their suffering was never repeated. Webb stood at the Pentagon's observation window and watched the assembly ship disappear into the stars. Behind him, Admiral Okonkwo approached. "Do you think they'll honor the treaty?" she asked. "They will," Webb said quietly, "because now they're afraid. Not of our weapons or our ships. They're afraid of what we became when they took away our mercy. They're afraid that if they break faith again, we'll become something even worse." He turned away from the window. Outside, Earth began to heal. Above, human ships patrolled their new galactic order, and throughout the Assembly's former territory, monuments were being built to remember the names of the dead. Humanity had learned its place in the galaxy, at the top, not through choice but through necessity. And mercy, once humanity's greatest virtue, had become the galaxy's most terrifying absence.